Sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it. Sometimes that chance washes up on your shore, broken and begging for mercy. Rúna had spent 53 years believing she was beyond redemption. The aging Viking warrior had returned to her village after decades of raiding, carrying nothing but scars and regret. The villagers whispered about her past, treated her like a stranger in her own home. Then the sea brought her a gift, a young woman, injured and trembling on the black sand. "Please, don't kick me. I'm already hurt," the girl cried. The villagers wanted to cast her out, called her a witch, but Rúna saw something else in those frightened eyes. She saw herself, years ago, when she too was broken and alone. The question that would change everything was simple. Would this hardened warrior choose compassion over cruelty? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The mist rolled in from the North Sea like the breath of sleeping gods, carrying with it the salt-sharp scent of seaweed and distant storms. Rúna pulled her weathered cloak tighter around her shoulders as she stood at her doorway, watching the tide retreat across the black-pebbled shore. The same shore where she had played as a child, before the world taught her that kindness was a luxury few could afford. Her cottage sat at the edge of Thorvald's Bay, a village that had once thrived on fishing and trade, but now clung to existence like barnacles on a storm-battered hull. The wooden structures, weathered grey by decades of coastal winds, huddled together as if seeking warmth from each other. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin, hesitant columns, and the morning air carried the sounds of daily life, children's laughter, the rhythmic thump of bread being kneaded, the scrape of nets being mended. But for Rúna, these sounds felt distant, separated by an invisible wall that had grown thicker with each passing season since her return. 3 years ago, she had walked back into Thorvald's Bay, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart heavy with memories she wished she could forget. The villagers had recognized her, of course. Some remembered the wild-haired girl who had vanished one spring morning 30 years prior, following the dragon-proud ships toward adventure and glory. Others knew her only by reputation, Rúna the Red. They had called her in the saga songs for the blood that stained her blade and the fire in her hair. Now, at 53, that fire had dimmed to ember grey, and the blood had long since washed away. But the songs remained, and with them, the fear. She turned from the doorway and surveyed her simple home. The cottage that had once belonged to her father bore little resemblance to the warm, welcoming space of her childhood. The hearthstone in the center, a massive piece of granite that had anchored 3 generations of her family, bore a long crack down its middle, a wound that mirrored the fractures in her own spirit. She had tried to repair it when she first returned, mixing clay and ash in the old way her grandmother had taught her. But the crack always returned, as persistent as her memories. The furnishings were sparse by necessity and choice. A simple bed frame she had built herself, a sturdy oak table scarred by use, 2 chairs that rarely hosted visitors. Her few possessions were practical things: iron pots, woolen blankets, fishing nets, and tools for tending the small garden that provided most of her meals. Hidden beneath loose floorboards lay her war chest, a iron-bound box containing remnants of a life she had tried to leave behind. She hadn't opened it in months, but she could feel its presence like a weight beneath her feet. The village had changed during her 3 decades away. Many of the faces she remembered were gone, claimed by age, disease, or the sea's hunger. New families had come, bringing their own customs and suspicions. The old blood feuds had mostly faded, replaced by the more immediate concerns of survival in an increasingly uncertain world. Trade routes had shifted, fish had grown scarcer, and the young men increasingly looked toward distant lands for opportunity. Bjorn the Elder served as the village's unofficial leader, a role he had inherited from his father and grandfather before him. He was a man of 60 winters, broad-shouldered and grey-bearded, with eyes that had seen enough hardship to appreciate peace. Bjorn remembered Runa's father with fondness, and had been among the few to welcome her return without open hostility. Still, even his acceptance came with conditions. She was to cause no trouble, attract no enemies, and leave the past buried where it belonged. The dead should stay dead, he had told her during that first awkward conversation 3 years ago, and old wars should stay, finished. Rúna had agreed, meaning it at the time. She had come home seeking nothing more than a quiet place to wait for her own death, somewhere she could lay down the sword and shield that had defined her for so long. But peace, she had discovered, was more difficult to achieve than victory in battle. The blacksmith, Einar, was another matter entirely. He had been a boy when she left, the youngest son of a family she had known well. Now he stood as tall as an oak tree, with arms like ship's timbers and a perpetual scowl that deepened whenever she appeared in his shop. His forge sat at the village's heart, and from it flowed the tools and weapons that kept Thorvald's Bay alive. But when Rúna brought him broken hinges or dull knives, he worked in sullen silence, taking her silver, but offering nothing in return beyond the repair itself. "My brother died on a raid ship," he had finally told her one day, his hammer striking the anvil with unnecessary force. "Following stories of glory and gold, following songs about warriors like you." She had tried to explain that she had never encouraged such songs, had never wanted the reputation that followed her like a hungry wolf. But Einar had turned his back, and the conversation died in the heat of his forge. Then there was Sigrid, her childhood friend, who now ran the village's small trading post. Where once they had shared secrets and dreams, now they exchanged only polite nods and careful words. Sigrid's husband had been lost to sea raiders 5 years prior, leaving her to raise 2 young children alone. The woman who greeted Rúna with cool efficiency bore little resemblance to the girl who had once braided flowers in her hair and spoken of traveling to distant kingdoms. "Time changes everything," Sigrid had said during one of their stilted conversations. "Sometimes I wonder if it's better to forget the past entirely." But forgetting was a luxury Rúna couldn't afford. The past lived in her bones, in the scars that ached before storms, in the dreams that woke her in the dark, hours before dawn. She had killed men and women whose names she never knew, burned villages whose crimes were nothing more than being in the path of her warband's hunger. She had stood in the shield wall when arrows fell like rain, had drunk victory mead from the skulls of enemies, had laughed while others wept. For 30 years, she had been a weapon in human form, honed to a killing edge by necessity and circumstance. The Viking way demanded strength above all else, strength to take what you needed, strength to defend what you held, strength to strike before others struck you. She had embraced that way completely, letting it reshape her until little remained of the girl who had once fed stray cats and wept over broken birds. The turning point had come during a raid on a Frankish monastery. She could still see the monk's face, an old man with kind eyes, who had offered her bread and water, even as her companions ransacked his holy books. He had spoken to her in accented Norse, asking about her family, her home, whether she had children of her own. Simple questions that cut deeper than any sword. That night, while her war brothers celebrated their victory, Rúna had sat alone by the fire and felt something crack inside her chest. Not her ribs, which had been broken many times, but something deeper, something that had once been soft and bright, now hard and dark as old iron. She had walked away the next morning, leaving behind her share of the plunder and her place in the warband. The others had called her fool, coward, weak. Their words had stung less than she expected. Perhaps weakness was what she needed. The journey home had taken her 3 months, traveling by foot and trading passage on merchant vessels. With each mile northward, she felt layers of herself falling away like old snakeskin. The swagger in her walk, the quick hand to her weapon, the predatory way she evaluated every stranger for threat or opportunity, all of it gradually dissolved until she felt hollow as a drum. Thorvald's Bay appeared before her on a morning much like this one, shrouded in mist and memory. The village had seemed smaller than she remembered, more fragile, as if a strong wind might blow it away entirely. She had stood on this same shore, fighting the urge to turn around and never look back. But she had stayed, and slowly built something resembling a life. She fished the same waters her father had worked, mended nets by the same techniques her grandmother had taught her, kept the same seasonal rhythms that had marked her childhood. The work was harder now, her joints ached from old injuries, her hands moved slower than they once had, but it carried a peace that battle had never offered. The villagers maintained their distance, not from hatred but from uncertainty. They treated her like a wolf that had wandered in from the forest, potentially dangerous, probably best left alone, but not necessarily hostile if unprovoked. Children stared at her with wide eyes when they thought she wasn't looking. Mothers pulled them a little closer when she passed. Men nodded respectfully but rarely started conversations. This careful equilibrium had lasted 3 years, and Rúna had almost convinced herself it was enough. Almost. Then the sea had brought her a gift, wrapped in torn cloth and desperation. A young woman, perhaps 20 summers old, with dark hair plastered to her skull and eyes wide with terror. She had washed ashore just as the tide began its retreat, crawling from the waves like a newborn emerging into a hostile world. Rúna had been checking her nets when she spotted the figure on the beach. At first, she had assumed it was driftwood or kelp, something cast up by the storm that had raged 2 nights prior. But then the shape had moved, raised a pale hand, and cried out in a voice that cut through the morning air like a knife. "Please, don't kick me. I'm already hurt." The words had stopped Rúna's heart for a moment, not because of their desperation, though that was clear enough, but because of their familiarity. She had spoken similar words herself once, long ago, when she had been young and afraid and far from home. Before the shield wall had taught her that showing weakness invited death. Other villagers had arrived quickly, drawn by the commotion. Bjorn the elder, his weathered face creased with concern. Einar the blacksmith, hammer still in hand from his morning work. Sigrid, wiping flour from her apron. Others followed, forming a loose circle around the stranger, like wolves around wounded prey. The girl, for she was little more than that, despite her woman's height, had pulled herself to sitting position with obvious difficulty. Her left arm hung useless at her side, and dark bruises colored her neck and face. Her clothing, what remained of it, marked her as someone of modest means, wool and linen, well made but not rich. She wore no jewelry except for a small silver pendant at her throat, its surface carved with symbols Rúna didn't recognize. "Witchcraft!" Someone had whispered from the crowd. "Look at those marks on her skin." "Demon scent," agreed another voice. "The sea spits up nothing good during storm seasons." But Rúna had seen something different. Where others saw supernatural threat, she recognized the all-too-human signs of violence and desperation. The bruises were finger-shaped, the tears in the girl's clothing deliberate. Someone had hurt her, badly, and she had fled to the sea as a last resort. The girl's eyes had found Rúna's across the circle of suspicious faces. In that moment, something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, or simply the understanding that comes when one survivor meets another. The girl had opened her mouth to speak, but exhaustion claimed her, and she collapsed back onto the wet sand. Now, hours later, Rúna stood in her cottage and tried to understand what had changed inside her. The careful equilibrium she had built over 3 years had shattered the moment she looked into those frightened eyes. The walls she had constructed around her heart suddenly felt paper-thin. She moved to the small window that faced the village center and watched as Bjorn the Elder emerged from his home, his expression grim. Behind him followed several other villagers, their faces set with the particular determination that came before difficult decisions. They would be coming for her soon, she knew, coming to discuss what should be done with the stranger. And Rúna found herself hoping, for the first time in years, that she still had enough fight left in her to do what was right rather than what was safe. The knock came at midday. firm but not aggressive, the sound of duty rather than anger. Rúna had been expecting it since dawn, when she had watched the villagers gather in the common area like crows before a storm. She opened her door to find Bjorn the Elder, flanked by 3 other men: Einar the blacksmith, Ulf the fisherman, and young Magnus, who served as the village's closest thing to a lawkeeper. "Rúna," Bjorn said, his voice carrying the weight of authority and reluctance in equal measure, "we need to speak with you about the girl." She stepped aside, gesturing them into her cottage. The men entered awkwardly, their bulk making her small space feel even more cramped. They declined her offer of ale, remaining standing in a loose semicircle near the hearth. The cracked hearthstone seemed to draw their eyes, a reminder of broken things that couldn't quite be mended. "The girl," Bjorn began again, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. "She spoke to Sigrid this morning, told her quite a tale." Rúna waited, having learned long ago that silence often revealed more than questions. "Says her name is Astrid," Ulf interjected, his fisherman's instincts making him impatient with deliberate pacing. "Claims she comes from the kingdom of Valdris, 3 days' sail south. Says she's running from accusations of witchcraft." The words hung in the air like smoke from green wood. Witchcraft was not a charge made lightly, nor one easily escaped. In most kingdoms, it meant death by burning or drowning, sometimes preceded by torture designed to extract confessions. "What manner of witchcraft?" Rúna asked, her voice carefully neutral. Magnus stepped forward, his young face earnest with the importance of his role. "She claims she was accused of poisoning Lord Ketil's son. The boy fell ill with a wasting sickness, and she had been treating him with herbal remedies. When he died, the Lord's wife pointed fingers." "Convenient timing," Einar muttered, his perpetual scowl deepening. "A foreign girl with knowledge of herbs and poisons happens to wash up on our shore, just as we're hearing rumors of raiders in the southern waters." Bjorn raised a hand for silence. "There's more. She says Lord Ketil's men pursued her to the coast. She stole a fishing boat and tried to sail north, but the storm caught her. The boat broke apart on the rocks at Seal Point. Rúna knew Seal Point, a treacherous stretch of coast 2 miles south where many vessels had met their end. If the girl had survived those waters in a storm, she was either blessed by the gods or possessed of remarkable will to live. So we have a possible witch, possibly innocent, who may or may not be pursued by armed men," Bjorn summarized. "The question before us is simple. What do we do with her?" The men exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that came from years of shared decisions and mutual trust. Rúna had been excluded from such exchanges since her return, always on the outside of the village's decision-making process. "Most of us think she should be sent away," Magnus said, his honesty making the words sharper than diplomacy might have allowed. "If she's guilty of witchcraft, we don't want that curse on our village. If she's innocent but pursued, we don't want her hunters bringing violence to our doors." "Either way, she's trouble," Ulf agreed. "We have enough problems keeping food on our tables and boats in the water. We don't need to borrow more from strangers." Einar's hammer-scarred hands clenched and unclenched as he spoke. "My vote is we put her back in a boat, a sound one this time, give her provisions, and send her north to Stavanger. Let them decide what to do with her." Rúna felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had expected this response, had even understood the reasoning behind it. Thorvald's Bay was a small village, barely hanging on to prosperity in the best of times. Taking in a fugitive, regardless of her guilt or innocence, represented a risk few could afford. But understanding didn't make acceptance easier. "And what does the girl say about this plan?" she asked. "She begs to stay," Bjorn replied quietly. "Says she has nowhere else to go, no family to take her in. Claims that if we send her away, she'll die within days." The image rose unbidden in Rúna's mind. The girl's terrified eyes as she cried out on the beach, the way she had pulled herself from the waves like a half-drowned cat. the desperation in her voice when she spoke those words that had echoed in Rúna's own memory. "Please, don't kick me. I'm already hurt." "She also said something else," Magnus added, glancing at the other men as if seeking permission to continue. "She asked specifically to speak with you. Said she could see in your eyes that you understood what it meant to be cast out." The words hit Rúna like a physical blow. In all her years of raiding and battle, she had prided herself on maintaining a warrior's mask, never showing weakness or uncertainty. But somehow this girl, this frightened, desperate stranger, had seen through 3 decades of carefully constructed armor to the broken woman beneath. "I see," Rúna said simply. Bjorn stepped closer, his voice dropping to the tone he might use with a skittish horse. "Rúna, we know you have a good heart. We've seen how you help repair nets without being asked, how you leave fish at the doors of families with too many mouths to feed. But this situation is different. This could bring danger to all of us. What if she's telling the truth?" Rúna asked. "What if she's innocent of the charges against her?" "Then we're sorry for her misfortune," Einar replied bluntly. "But we can't save every victim of injustice that washes up on our shore. We have our own people to protect." Rúna walked to her window and looked out toward the beach where Astrid had been found. The tide was coming in again, erasing the marks of the morning's drama as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something that had awakened feelings she thought she had buried, along with her warrior's identity. "Where is she now?" she asked. "Sigrid's taking care of her," Magnus replied. "Gave her dry clothes, some food, tended to her injuries. But Sigrid agrees with the rest of us. The girl needs to move on." Rúna closed her eyes and tried to imagine the scene. Astrid, sitting in Sigrid's warm kitchen, surrounded by the domestic comfort she herself had been denied for so many years. Sigrid would be kind but firm, explaining why the village couldn't risk keeping her. The girl would nod and agree, perhaps even express gratitude for the help she had received. But her eyes would hold the same desperate fear Rúna had seen on the beach. "I want to speak with her," Rúna said finally. The men exchanged another round of glances. Bjorn cleared his throat. "Rúna, I know what you're thinking, but you don't know what I'm thinking," she interrupted, turning back to face them. "You know what you fear I'm thinking. There's a difference." "Then tell us," Einar challenged, his blacksmith's directness cutting through diplomatic niceties. "Tell us you're not planning to do something that will bring trouble down on all our heads." Rúna met his gaze steadily. "I'm planning to listen to her story, to look into her eyes and decide for myself whether she's telling the truth. Then I'll make my choice based on what I find." "And if you decide she's innocent?" Magnus asked. "What then?" "Then I'll do what my conscience tells me to do." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. These men knew her history, knew the stories of her battles and the reputation she had earned with sword and shield. They also knew that conscience had driven her to walk away from that life, to seek redemption in this quiet village by the sea. Bjorn finally nodded, the gesture carrying the weight of resignation. "Very well. Speak with her. But remember, Rúna, whatever you decide affects all of us. The days when you could make choices for yourself alone are behind you now." After the men left, Rúna sat by her cracked hearthstone and tried to understand what was happening inside her chest. For 3 years, she had carefully constructed a life of simple routines and modest ambitions. She fished, she mended nets, she kept to herself. She had found a kind of peace in that simplicity, even if it felt hollow at times. But now, faced with a choice between safety and conscience, she felt something stirring that she had thought was dead. Not the bloodlust that had once driven her into battle, but something older and deeper, the protective instinct that had made her shield sister to warriors who couldn't defend themselves, that had driven her to stand between the strong and the weak, even when it cost her dearly. She reached beneath the loose floorboard and withdrew a small silver object, a pendant identical to the one she had seen at Astrid's throat. She had taken it from a dying monk during that last raid, not for its value, but because something about its craftsmanship had caught her eye. Now she turned it over in her scarred fingers, studying the symbols carved into its surface. They were protection runes, she realized, ancient marks meant to ward off evil and bring safe passage to travelers. Not the tools of witchcraft, but the desperate hope of someone who knew she faced great danger. Rúna closed her fist around the pendant and made her choice. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the village common as Rúna made her way to Sigrid's trading post. Her decision had crystallized into something hard and immovable in her chest, but she knew that acting on it would shatter the careful peace she had built over 3 years. Still, some choices demanded to be made, regardless of their cost. Sigrid's establishment occupied the largest building in the village center, its wooden walls lined with shelves that held everything from fishing hooks to imported amber. The familiar scents of preserved fish, wool and seal oil greeted Rúna as she pushed through the heavy door. Normally, these smells brought comfort reminders of home and stability. Today, they felt like the last breath of a life she was about to leave behind. She found Astrid sitting on a low stool near the hearth, wrapped in one of Sigrid's good cloaks and holding a steaming bowl of fish stew. The girl looked smaller in dry clothes, younger and more fragile than she had appeared on the beach. Her dark hair, now clean and braided in the local style, framed a face that showed both intelligence and deep exhaustion. Sigrid emerged from the back room, her expression carefully neutral when she saw Rúna. "I wondered when you'd come," she said simply. "The men told me you've been caring for her," Rúna replied, noting how Astrid's eyes tracked their conversation with alert awareness. "Someone had to." Sigrid's tone carried no judgment, but Rúna heard the unspoken words beneath. Someone always has to clean up after others, make hard choices. "I'd like to speak with her alone." Sigrid hesitated, glancing between Rúna and Astrid. "Rúna, know what the village has decided. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." 5 minutes, Rúna said quietly. "That's all I ask." After a moment, Sigrid nodded and retreated to the back room, leaving the two women facing each other across the flickering hearth. Astrid set down her bowl and straightened, meeting Rúna's gaze with surprising directness for someone in her position. "They say you're going to send me away," Astrid said, her voice steady despite the fear Rúna could see in her eyes. "They say many things. I prefer to form my own opinions." Rúna pulled up a chair and sat across from the girl. "Tell me about the pendant you wear." Astrid's hand moved instinctively to her throat, fingers tracing the silver amulet. "It was my mother's. She said it would protect me from harm. Your mother was wise. Those are ancient protection runes older than the kingdoms, older than the Christ God the southern lands have embraced." Rúna withdrew the matching pendant from her pouch, watching as Astrid's eyes widened in recognition. "I've carried this one for 3 years, ever since I took it from a dying monk who claimed it saved his life more than once." "You're a raider," Astrid whispered, but without the fear such knowledge usually brought. Instead, her voice held something like understanding. "I was. For 30 years, I lived by the sword and shield. I've done things that would make you weep, child. Things that still wake me in the night." Rúna turned the pendant over in her scarred fingers. "But I've also learned to recognize the difference between guilty and innocent. You wear protection runes, not curses. You speak of healing herbs, not poisons. Whatever happened in Voldris, you're no witch." Tears gathered in Astrid's eyes, but she blinked them back with the determination of someone who had learned that crying rarely helped. "Lord Ketil's son was dying when I arrived at their hall. His mother had already tried 3 different healers, all of whom fled when their treatments failed. I should have been wiser, should have refused to help, but he was only 12 years old, and in such pain. What was wrong with him? A wasting sickness that ate at his strength day by day. Fever that came and went like tide, but each time leaving him weaker. I recognized the signs from my training with the village wise woman in my home settlement." Astrid's voice grew steadier as she fell into the rhythm of explanation. The treatments I gave him eased his suffering and even brought improvement for a time. But the sickness was too far advanced. When he finally slipped away, his mother's grief needed a target. "And you were convenient," Rúna said, understanding the cruel logic of it. "Foreign, alone, and skilled with herbs that most people feared to touch. Lady Solveig convinced her husband that I had hastened the boy's death to steal his life force for dark magic. Within hours, half the household believed her story." Rúna studied the girl's face, reading the truth in the set of her jaw and the direct way she met difficult questions. She had interrogated enough prisoners to recognize deception and found none here. What she saw instead was the kind of exhausted honesty that came from someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to hide. "How did you escape?" A kitchen servant warned me. She had seen Lady Solveig mixing something into the wine that was meant for my evening meal, probably the same poison she claimed I had used on her son. "I fled that night, stealing a boat from the harbor and sailing north until the storm caught me." The pieces of the story fit together with the precision of a well-made lock. A grieving mother, a convenient scapegoat, and a young woman with just enough knowledge to be dangerous in the wrong circumstances. Rúna had seen similar injustices play out countless times, in countless kingdoms. The powerful always found ways to blame the powerless for their misfortunes. "What will you do if the village sends you away?" she asked. Astrid was quiet for a long moment, staring into the hearth fire, as if searching for answers in the flames. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "I have no family left, no place that would welcome me. If Lord Ketil's men are still hunting me, I won't survive long on my own. And if they're not, if the chase ended when you reached the sea, then I'll find somewhere to start over, I suppose. Learn to hide what I know about healing, pretend to be nothing more than what people expect to see." The resignation in her voice cut deeper than any plea might have. Rúna stood and walked to the window, looking out at the village that had become her refuge. She could see Bjorn's house, where the elder was probably discussing contingency plans with his wife. Einar's forge, where smoke still rose from the day's work. The small dock where fishing boats bobbed like sleeping gulls. This place had given her 3 years of peace. 3 years to lay down the weight of violence and try to become something other than a weapon. But peace, built on turning away from injustice, wasn't peace at all. It was just another form of cowardice. "There's something I need to retrieve from my cottage," she said, turning back to Astrid. "Wait here." The walk home felt longer than usual, each step carrying her further from the simple life she had constructed and closer to something far more complicated. Her cottage looked smaller and shabbier than she remembered, as if her decision had already begun to diminish its importance in her world. She knelt beside the loose floorboard and pulled up the hidden war chest she hadn't opened in 6 months. The iron hinges protested with a squeal that seemed unnaturally loud in the cottage's stillness. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather, lay the tools of her former trade. Her sword, its blade still sharp despite years of neglect. A CX, the long knife that had saved her life more times than she could count. Braces of boiled leather reinforced with iron rings. A mail shirt that bore the scars of a dozen battles. But it wasn't the weapons she sought. Beneath them, in a compartment she had built herself, lay a small collection of items that represented a different aspect of her warrior years. A silver arm ring given to her by a shield sister who had died saving her life. A piece of carved bone that had once belonged to a child she had failed to protect. And a leather cord hung with 3 iron rings, tokens of oaths she had sworn and kept, even when keeping them cost her dearly. She selected the cord and tied it around her neck, feeling the weight of old promises settle against her chest. Then she closed the war chest and returned the floorboard to its place. Some choices once made couldn't be unmade, but some oaths, once sworn, demanded to be honored regardless of the consequences. When Rúna returned to Sigrid's trading post, she found the afternoon shadows had lengthened, and the village was beginning its evening routines. Smoke rose from chimneys as families prepared their meals, and children's voices carried on the salt-tinged breeze. Normal sounds of a normal day, but Rúna felt as though she was viewing it all through glass, present but separate, connected but not belonging. Astrid looked up as she entered, and Rúna saw the girl's eyes widen slightly at the sight of the iron rings now hanging at her throat. Those old oath tokens caught the firelight like captured stars, each one a reminder of promises that had shaped her warrior years. "You've made your decision," Astrid said quietly. "It wasn't a question." "I have." Rúna settled back into her chair, noting how Sigrid had positioned herself where she could hear every word while pretending to organize inventory. "But before I tell you what it is, I need to know something. Can you really heal people, or is that just another convenient story?" Astrid's chin lifted with a pride that transformed her young face. "My grandmother was the wisest healer in our district. She taught me to read the body's signs, to know which herbs strengthen and which harm, to see the difference between sickness that can be fought and sickness that must be accepted. I've delivered babies, set broken bones, and eased the passing of those who couldn't be saved. It's not magic, it's knowledge passed down through generations of women who cared more about helping than about being understood. Show me." Without hesitation, Astrid rose and moved to where Rúna sat. "Give me your left hand," she said, her voice taking on the confident tone of someone working within their expertise. Rúna extended her hand, watching as Astrid's fingers traced the old scars that crisscrossed her palm and knuckles. The girl's touch was gentle but sure, reading the history written in damaged flesh. "This one," Astrid said, indicating a puckered scar near Rúna's wrist, "came from a blade that cut deep enough to nick the bone. It healed crooked because whoever tended it didn't know to properly align the muscle beneath the skin. That's why your grip isn't as strong as it once was." Rúna stared at the girl in surprise. The old wound was something she had never discussed with anyone, but Astrid had read its story like runes carved in stone. "And this," the girl continued, touching a discolored patch near Rúna's thumb, "was burned, then got infected because it wasn't kept clean. You probably had fever for days, maybe weeks. The infection left weakness in these two fingers that gets worse when the weather turns cold." Every word was true. Rúna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "How can you know all that?" "The same way you know the difference between a warrior and a farmer, by watching how they move," Astrid replied simply. "The body tells stories to those who know how to read them. Your hands have seen much violence, but they've also known gentleness. See these calluses here? They're from rope work, net mending, careful tasks that require patience. You've spent years learning to be something other than what you were trained to be." Sigrid had stopped even pretending to work, staring openly at the strange scene playing out in her trading post. Rúna gently withdrew her hand, shaken by how easily this stranger had read the most intimate details of her physical history. "There's your proof," she said finally. "No witch could fake that kind of knowledge." "Then you believe me?" Hope flickered in Astrid's voice like candlelight in wind. "I believe you. More importantly, I believe you're worth protecting." Rúna stood, decision crystallizing into action. "Come, we're going to my cottage." Sigrid stepped forward, alarm clear on her face. "Rúna, think about what you're doing. The village council can make their own choices," Rúna finished, "as I'm making mine. This will bring trouble down on all of us. Maybe, or maybe it will bring something else entirely." Rúna met her old friend's worried gaze. "Sigrid, do you remember when we were children and that pack of wild dogs cornered young Eric behind the fish-drying racks? Do you remember what you did?" Sigrid's expression softened with memory. "I threw stones at them until they ran away. You were 8 years old, and those dogs were bigger than you, but you didn't hesitate, didn't calculate the risk. You saw someone who needed help, and you helped them." Runa's voice grew gentle. I'm asking you to remember that girl. That was different. Eric was one of us. No, Rúna said quietly. That was exactly the same. The only difference is that we've learned to draw circles around who deserves our protection and who doesn't. But some things are bigger than circles. Astrid rose from her stool, moving carefully to avoid aggravating her injuries. I don't want to cause trouble for anyone. If my presence here endangers the village has been in danger since the day it was founded, Rúna interrupted. Storm and disease, raiders and starvation. We've faced them all. One more challenge won't break us, and turning away from justice certainly won't make us stronger. As they prepared to leave, Astrid paused near a shelf lined with carved wooden items. Her fingers traced the edge of a small knife, its handle wrapped with leather cord, and its blade designed for delicate work rather than fighting. May I? She asked Sigrid. What do you need it for? If I'm to stay here, even temporarily, I should earn my keep. This would be perfect for preparing medicines, scraping bark, cutting roots, mixing compounds. I could help tend the village children when they fall ill, assist with difficult births, ease the suffering of the elderly. Sigrid looked to Rúna, who nodded encouragement. Take it, Sigrid said finally. But Astrid, if you're lying about any of this, if you bring harm to even one child in this village, I'll throw you to the sea myself. I understand, Astrid replied, tucking the knife into her belt with the reverence of someone receiving a sacred trust. And I promise you won't regret this kindness. The walk to Rúna's cottage was conducted in comfortable silence, both women lost in their own thoughts. The evening air carried the sense of cooking fires and the eternal presence of the sea, reminders of the life Rúna had built in this place. As they approached her door, she wondered how much of that life would survive the choice she had made. Inside the cottage, Astrid looked around with the careful attention of someone assessing a new environment. Her gaze lingered on the cracked hearthstone, the sparse furnishings, the fishing nets hung carefully for mending. You live simply, she observed. Simple is honest, Rúna replied, moving to prepare tea from her small store of dried herbs. For most of my life, I lived surrounded by gold and silver, fine weapons and rich furs, but all of it was taken from others, paid for with blood and suffering. This cottage, these nets, this quiet life, I earned them with honest work. Do you miss it? The wealth, the excitement? Rúna considered the question as she filled her iron kettle from the water barrel. I miss the clarity, she said finally. When you live by the sword, every problem has a simple solution. Someone threatens you, you kill them. Someone takes what's yours, you take it back with interest. Someone insults you, you show them the price of disrespect. She hung the kettle over the fire and watched flames lick at its bottom. It's only when you try to live differently that you discover how complicated the world really is. Is that why you're helping me? To recapture that clarity? No, Rúna said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I'm helping you because 30 years ago, someone helped me when I was young and desperate and far from home. A shield sister named Thora, who could have left me to die on a battlefield in Frankish lands, but chose to carry me to safety instead. She never asked what I could do for her in return, never calculated whether I was worth the risk. She simply saw someone who needed help, and she helped. What happened to her? She died 2 years later, fighting raiders who attacked a monastery full of children. Took 7 arrows before they brought her down, and never dropped her shield. Rúna's voice grew quiet with old grief. I've spent 30 years trying to be worthy of that sacrifice. Maybe helping you is part of that debt. Astrid was silent for a long moment, watching the flames dance beneath the kettle. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that seemed too heavy for her young shoulders. My grandmother used to say that kindness was like water. It always finds a way to flow forward, from one person to the next, until it reaches someone who needs it most. Wise woman, your grandmother. She would have liked you, I think. She have always said the strongest people were those who chose gentleness after learning how much damage they could do. Outside, night was falling over Thorvald's Bay, and with it would come the reckoning Rúna had set in motion. Tomorrow, the village would wake to find that their most dangerous resident had taken a stand that could endanger them all. Some would be angry, others afraid, a few might even understand. But tonight, in the warm glow of her cottage hearth, Rúna felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of choosing correctly, regardless of the cost. The dawn brought more than light to Thorvald's Bay, it brought consequences. Rúna woke to the sound of raised voices outside her cottage, the kind of heated discussion that preceded difficult decisions. Through her small window, she could see a cluster of villagers gathered near the well, their gestures sharp with frustration and fear. Astrid sat at the small table, already dressed and alert despite the early hour. She had fashioned a simple breakfast from Rúna's meager supplies, moving quietly to avoid disturbing her host's sleep. The domesticity of the scene felt strange after so many years of solitary mornings. "They're angry," Astrid observed, nodding toward the window. "They're afraid," Rúna corrected, pulling on her boots. "Anger is just fear wearing different clothes." A sharp knock interrupted their conversation. Rúna opened the door to find young Magnus, his face flushed with exertion and worry. Behind him stood 3 other villagers, including Olaf, the rope maker, and his wife Ingrid. "There are strangers in the village," Magnus said without preamble. 3 men, armed, asking questions about a runaway girl. Rúna felt ice form in her stomach, but her voice remained steady. "What kind of questions?" "They claim to be traveling merchants," Ingrid spoke up, her weathered hands twisting her apron with nervous energy. "But merchants don't carry war axes, and they don't offer silver just for information about strangers." "Where are they now?" Astrid asked, appearing in the doorway behind Rúna. Magnus's eyes widened at the sight of her. "You're the one they're seeking, aren't you?" Before Astrid could answer, Rúna stepped forward. "Where are they, Magnus?" "Bjorn is speaking with them at the trading post. He sent me to warn you, said to tell you that he's buying time. But not much." Rúna's mind began working through possibilities with the tactical precision that had kept her alive through 30 years of warfare. 3 armed men meant either a small hunting party or the advance guard of something larger. Either way, they represented immediate danger, not just to Astrid, but to anyone who had helped her. "Did they give names?" she asked. "The leader calls himself Gunnar. Big man, scarred face, carries himself like a warrior. The other 2 defer to him, but they're dangerous too." Magnus paused, glancing nervously at Astrid. "Gunnar says they're working for Lord Ketil of Valdris, tracking a murderess who poisoned his son." Astrid's face went pale, but she lifted her chin with defiance. "I've murdered no one." "Maybe not," Olaf said grimly, "but that won't matter if they decide to take you back. Dead or alive, you represent completion of their task." Rúna felt the familiar weight of decision settling on her shoulders. She could surrender Astrid to these men, preserving the village's safety at the cost of an innocent life. She could help the girl flee, hoping she might find sanctuary elsewhere. Or she could stand and fight, risking everything for the principle that justice mattered more than convenience. The choice, when it came, felt inevitable. "Magnus, how long before they finish talking with Bjorn?" "Not long. He's asking about their travels, offering hospitality, but they're impatient. I'd guess maybe a quarter hour before they start searching house to house. Then we don't have time for elaborate plans." Rúna turned to Astrid. "Can you fight?" "I've never killed anyone," Astrid replied honestly, "but I won't go meekly to my death either." "Good enough." Rúna moved to her hidden war chest, lifting the loose floorboard with practiced efficiency. "Magnus, I need you to run to Einar's forge. Tell him Rúna says it's time to honor old debts." "What old debts?" "He'll know." She pulled her mail shirt from the chest, feeling its familiar weight. "Olaf, your sons, where are they?" "Working the nets at the southern cove. Send Ingrid to fetch them. Tell them to bring axes and anything else that might serve as weapons. We may need every able body before this is finished." "Rúna," Magnus said carefully, "what exactly are you planning?" She looked up from strapping on her sword belt, the leather worn smooth by decades of use. "I'm planning to remind some visitors that Thorvald's Bay protects its own." "But she's not," Magnus began, then stopped as he caught the look in Rúna's eyes. "She is now," Rúna said simply. "Anyone under my roof, anyone I've given guest right to, belongs to this village until I say otherwise. That's the old law, the true law that runs deeper than convenience or fear." As the others scattered to carry out her instructions, Rúna helped Astrid gather her few possessions. The girl moved with quick efficiency, showing none of the panic that might have been expected. "You're calmer than I thought you'd be," Rúna observed. "I've been running for 2 weeks," Astrid replied, tucking her healing supplies into a small leather pouch. "I'm tired of running. Whatever happens now, at least I'll face it with someone willing to stand beside me." Rúna selected a long knife from her war chest and offered it handle first to Astrid. "This was my shield sister's CX. She would have approved of you, I think." Astrid accepted the weapon with reverence, testing its balance with movements that suggested some familiarity with blades. "Your shield sister, the one who died protecting children?" "Thora. She always said that a weapon was only as honorable as the hand that wielded it." Rúna closed the war chest and replaced the floorboard. "Today, we'll see if that wisdom holds true." They left the cottage together, stepping into a morning that felt charged with the promise of violence. Across the village, Rúna could see the signs of her hastily assembled plan taking shape. Einar emerging from his forge with a warhammer in his massive hands. Olaf's sons jogging in from the southern path, fishing spears glinting in the early light. Other villagers taking positions that could serve as cover or vantage points. Not everyone supported her choice. She could see that in the closed shutters of some houses, the way certain families had retreated indoors rather than take sides. But enough stood with her to make a difference. Enough to remind these hunters that Thorvald's Bay was not a place where strangers could take what they pleased without consequence. As they approached the village center, a raven landed on the peak of Sigrid's trading post, its black feathers gleaming like polished obsidian in the morning sun. It cocked its head to study the scene below, then opened its beak and released a single harsh cry that seemed to echo off the surrounding hills. Rúna took it as an omen, whether good or ill remained to be seen. Ravens were messengers of the gods, witnesses to great deeds and terrible failures alike. Today, they would bear witness to whatever came next. "Are you ready?" she asked Astrid as they paused at the edge of the common area. "I've been ready since the moment I crawled out of those waves," Astrid replied, her young face set with determination that reminded Rúna of her own reflection at that age. "The question is whether they're ready for us." Rúna smiled grimly, feeling the old familiar stirring of pre-battle anticipation. "Let's go find out." The confrontation unfolded with the death's sun, a careful choreography of predators circling prey. Gunnar and his 2 companions stood near the well, their relaxed postures belying the hands that rested close to weapon hilts. They were seasoned fighters. Rúna could see the kind of men who had learned to read danger in a crowd's movement, in the subtle shift of weight that preceded violence. Bjorn the Elder maintained his role as gracious host, but sweat beaded his forehead despite the cool morning air. He gestured broadly as he spoke, describing the village's fishing grounds and trade connections with the enthusiasm of a man trying to fill silence with harmless words. "As you can see, honored guests, we're a simple community," Bjorn was saying as Rúna and Astrid approached. "Fishermen, craftsmen, folk who keep to ourselves and trouble no one." Gunnar's scarred face turned toward them with the lazy attention of a cat-spotting movement. He was indeed a large man, broad-shouldered and thick-armed, with the kind of presence that commanded space even when standing still. His companions, one lean and quick-looking, the other built like a tree trunk, flanked him with practiced ease. "And yet," Gunnar said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, Someone in this peaceful village has been harboring a fugitive. Someone has chosen to interfere with Lord Catil's justice. His eyes settled on Astrid with unmistakable recognition. There she is, the poisoner who murdered an innocent child. I am no murderer, Astrid said clearly, stepping forward despite Rúna's protective instinct to shield her. I tried to heal that boy. His death grieves me as much as anyone. The lean hunter spat into the dust, pretty words from a witch's tongue. Lord Catil has witnesses to your guilt. His own wife saw you mixing the poison that killed young Thormund. Lady Solveig saw what grief wanted her to see, Astrid replied. The same grief that now sends armed men to terrorize innocent villages. Gunnar's hand moved to his axe handle, the gesture casual but unmistakable. Innocent? You call this place innocent when it shelters murderers and thieves? I call it home, Rúna said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. And I call myself someone who doesn't appreciate threats against my guests. For the first time, Gunnar's attention focused fully on her. His eyes tracked over her mail shirt, noted the sword at her hip, assessed the way she held herself with a warrior's balance. Recognition dawned slowly, like sunrise breaking through winter clouds. You're her, he said softly. Rúna the Red, I heard you were dead. Reports of my death have been somewhat exaggerated, Rúna replied dryly, though they may prove prophetic if you continue threatening people under my protection. The lean hunter laughed, but the sound held no humor. One aging shield maiden against three of us. Your reputation precedes you, woman, but so does your age. Rúna smiled, and several villagers stepped back involuntarily. It was not a pleasant expression. Hakon, she called without turning, would you kindly show our guests the hammer you've been working on? Einar emerged from behind a nearby building, his massive warhammer resting easily across his shoulders. The weapon was a masterpiece of the smith's art steel head, balanced perfectly on an ash handle, decorated with intricate metalwork that spoke of both beauty and function. This one? He asked mildly. Been meaning to test the balance. What better opportunity than now? The tree trunk hunter shifted nervously, recognizing the blacksmith's size and obvious skill. 3 against 2 isn't much better odds, he muttered. 3 against 2. Magnus appeared from another direction, a fishing spear in his hands and 3 more villagers behind him. I think you've miscounted. More figures emerged from concealment, Olaf's sons with their axes, Ingrid carrying a wicked-looking gutting, a knife, even old Thorvald himself, hobbling forward with a walking stick that looked suspiciously like it could crack skulls. Gunnar's expression shifted from confidence to wariness as he realized the trap closing around them. But instead of backing down, he straightened with the pride of a man who had faced worse odds and survived. Very impressive, he said. But you're all missing the larger picture. Lord Catil doesn't send 3 men to retrieve 1 fugitive. He sends 3 men to confirm her location. His smile was cold as winter sea. The real hunting party is already on its way. Rúna felt the words hit like a physical blow. A scouting party, of course. No lord would risk valuable men in a potentially hostile village when he could simply verify the target's location and return with overwhelming force. How many? She asked, abandoning pretense. Enough, Gunnar replied. Lord Catil is not a man who accepts defiance lightly. When he arrives tomorrow with his full warband, this village will learn the price of harboring his enemies. Bjorn the Elder stepped forward, his face pale but determined. We are simple fisherfolk. We have no quarrel with Lord Catil or anyone else. Perhaps if the girl were to leave peacefully, too late for that, the lean hunter interrupted. Your village has chosen sides. Lord Catil will want to make an example to ensure other communities don't make the same mistake. Astrid's voice cut through the growing despair. This is my fault. I brought this danger to you all. She turned to face the villagers who had risked themselves to defend her. I won't let innocent people suffer for my troubles. I'll go with them. No, Rúna said firmly. You won't. But if I don't, if you do, it won't matter. They'll still burn this village to make their point. Tyrants don't spare those who show weakness, they devour them. Rúna's tactical mind was already working through possibilities, discarding hopeless options and focusing on the few that might offer survival. How many ships did Lord Ketil bring? Gunnar hesitated, then shrugged. 3 longships, 90 men, all told. More than enough to handle one village and its protectors. 90 warriors against perhaps 20 villagers capable of fighting impossible odds by any reasonable measure. But Rúna had faced impossible odds before and learned that victory often came not from strength, but from understanding what your enemy wanted and finding ways to deny it to them. When will they arrive? She asked. Dawn tomorrow, if the winds hold. Less than 24 hours to prepare for a siege that would determine not just Astrid's fate, but the survival of everyone who had chosen to stand with her. Rúna looked around at the faces surrounding her, farmers and fishermen, craftsmen and children, people who had never wanted anything more than to live their lives in peace. Now they would have to fight for that peace, or lose everything in the attempt. Very well, she said, her voice carrying the authority of command that had once led war bands across foreign shores. Gunnar, you and your men will be our guests until this matter is resolved. I'm sure you understand the need for hospitality. The scarred warrior's laugh held genuine appreciation. Hostages, you mean? Clever. But it won't change the outcome. Perhaps not, Rúna agreed. But it might change the cost. As the villagers began the grim work of preparing defenses, Rúna caught sight of the raven, still perched atop Sigrid's trading post. It watched the proceedings with unblinking intelligence, as if measuring the worth of mortals who dared challenge fate itself. Tomorrow would bring the test that would define them all. The evening brought an unexpected visitor to Thorvald's Bay, a lone rider who approached under the pale banner of truce, her horse's hooves echoing against the stone-strewn path like measured drumbeats. Rúna watched from the villages hastily and constructed defenses as the figure dismounted near the well, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who understood they were entering hostile territory. The rider was a woman of perhaps 40 winters, tall and angular, with the kind of bearing that spoke of noble birth and hard-won authority. Her travel-stained cloak bore the colors of Valdris, but her eyes held secrets that ran deeper than political allegiance. I would speak with the one called Rúna the Red, she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the common area. I come bearing information that concerns the fate of this village and the girl you protect. Gunnar, secured with rope but still defiant in captivity, looked up sharply at the woman's arrival. Lady Solveig, he breathed, and Rúna saw something like fear flicker across his scarred features. Astrid went rigid beside her. That's her, she whispered, the boy's mother, the one who accused me of murder. Rúna studied the woman with a warrior's eye, and for detail. Lady Solveig moved with purpose, but there was something brittle about her composure, like iron that had been heated and cooled too many times. Her hands shook slightly as she folded back her hood, revealing silver-streaked hair and a face marked by grief that had calcified into something harder and more dangerous. I'll hear what she has to say, Rúna decided, stepping forward with Astrid at her side. But I make no promises about believing it. Lady Solveig's gaze fixed on Astrid with an intensity that made the younger woman step closer to Rúna's protective presence. So, she said softly, you're the one who killed my son. I tried to save your son, Astrid replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. I failed, and that failure will haunt me until my dying day. But I did not murder him. No, Lady Solveig said, and the single word dropped into the evening air like a stone into still water. You did not. The silence that followed was so complete that Rúna could hear the distant crash of waves against the shore, the rustle of wind through the village's thatched roofs. Even Gunnar had gone still, his warrior's instincts recognizing the moment when everything familiar became uncertain. What did you say? Astrid whispered. Lady Solveig's composed mask cracked, revealing raw grief underneath. I said you did not kill my son. I know this because I know who did. Her voice broke on the last words, and she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth before continuing. I know because the true murderer wears a crown and calls herself my daughter. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Rúna felt the world shift around her, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed, suddenly clicking into place with terrible clarity. Your daughter? She asked carefully. My stepdaughter, to be precise. Ingrid, my husband's child from his first marriage. She has been ambitious since childhood. Lady Solveig's bitter laugh held no humour. When Thormund fell ill, I thought it was merely the wasting sickness that sometimes takes young children. I never suspected. She stopped, gathering herself with visible effort. Suspected what? Astrid demanded, her healer's instincts overriding her fear. That she was slowly poisoning him with extract of yew bark mixed into his evening milk. A dose so small it mimicked natural illness, so carefully measured that it took weeks to kill him. Lady Solveig reached into her travel bag and withdrew a small vial filled with dark liquid. I found this hidden in her chambers, along with detailed notes about dosages and effects. Rúna took the vial, noting the way the liquid seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Even without opening it, she could sense the malevolence contained within the innocent-looking glass. Why? Astrid asked, the question torn from her like a physical wound. He was just a child. What could she possibly gain from his death? Succession. Lady Solveig replied simply. With Thormund dead and no other male heirs, Ingrid becomes my husband's primary beneficiary, but only if there's no one left to challenge her claim. Her eyes fixed on Astrid with terrible understanding. You were meant to be executed for Thormund's murder, thus eliminating any witnesses who might have seen through her deception. When you escaped, she convinced my husband to send his entire warband after you. To silence me permanently, Astrid breathed. And to eliminate this village as well, to ensure no one could shelter you or carry tales back to Valdris. Lady Solveig's voice grew harder. She's quite thorough, my stepdaughter. She leaves no loose ends. Gunnar struggled against his bonds, his face twisted with dawning horror. You're lying. Lady Ingrid is Lord Ketil's beloved daughter. She would never, wouldn't she? Lady Solveig turned on him with savage intensity. Tell me, warrior, who suggested that the poisoner might flee north? Who provided the description that led you to this village? Who insisted that anyone harboring the fugitive must also be eliminated as accomplices? The color drained from Gunnar's face as memory provided unwelcome answers. Rúna's tactical mind was already processing the implications. The war band arriving tomorrow, they're not coming to retrieve a fugitive. They're coming to complete a massacre that will bury the truth forever. Lord Ketil doesn't know, Lady Solveig confirmed. He believes he's avenging his son's murder and upholding justice. He has no idea he's being used as a weapon by the true killer. Then we have to warn him, Astrid said immediately. We have to make him understand. With what proof? Rúna interrupted gently. A grieving stepmother's accusations and a vial of poison that could have come from anywhere. By tomorrow, there will be 90 armed men, convinced they're fighting for justice, led by a father seeking vengeance for his murdered child. There is one proof, Lady Solveig said quietly, reaching into her bag again. This time she withdrew a small object wrapped in silk, a royal circlet, its gold surface intricate with gems and metalwork. But as she unwrapped it, Rúna could see a dark stain along the inner band, and her warrior's nose detected the faint but unmistakable scent of poison. Ingrid prepared this for my return, Lady Solveig explained. She expects me to bring news of the fugitive's death, and then to place this crown upon my head in a ceremony naming me as regent until she comes of age. The poison would take effect within hours, leaving her as the sole heir to everything my husband has built. Astrid examined the circlet with her healer's knowledge, confirming what they all suspected. The same compound that killed Thormund, but in concentrated form. Designed to kill quickly once absorbed through the skin. She's been planning this for months, Lady Solveig continued. positioning pieces, eliminating obstacles, ensuring that when the final move comes, there will be no one left to oppose her claim. She looked around at the villagers who had gathered to listen, their faces reflecting the horror of the revelation. You were all meant to die tomorrow, not for sheltering a murderer, but for existing as potential witnesses to the truth. Rúna felt the familiar stirring of battle rage, the cold fury that had once made her legendary among the warbands of the northern seas. But this time, the anger burned for justice rather than glory, for protection rather than conquest. "How long before Lord Ketil arrives?" she asked. "Dawn," as Gunnar said. "But Rúna," Lady Solveig's voice carried desperate urgency, "even if you could convince him of the truth, Ingrid will have contingencies. She's had weeks to prepare for every possibility." "Then we'll have to be more creative than she anticipated," Rúna replied, her mind already working through options that would have seemed impossible hours before. "Tell me everything you know about her plans, her resources, her weaknesses. If we're going to stop a murderess from claiming a throne, we'll need every advantage we can find." As Lady Solveig began to speak, revealing the full scope of Ingrid's machinations, Rúna felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a familiar cloak. Tomorrow would bring more than a battle for survival. It would bring a reckoning with corruption that threatened to poison an entire kingdom. The girl who had washed ashore seeking mercy had brought with her a chance to prevent a greater evil from taking root. Now it remained to be seen whether an aging warrior and a scattered village could stand against the ambitions of a patient and ruthless killer. The night passed in a fever of preparation, the village transformed from a peaceful fishing community into something resembling a war camp. Rúna moved through the darkness with the efficiency of someone who had planned desperate defenses before. Her voice, carrying quiet authority as she positioned resources and people for the battle to come. But this would be unlike any fight she had ever faced. Tomorrow's conflict would not be won with sword and shield alone. It would require convincing a grieving father that his beloved daughter was a cold-blooded killer, all while surrounded by 90 warriors convinced they were fighting for justice. "The boats," she told Einar as they reinforced the smithy's stone walls. "Move them all to the southern cove except for 2. We need to control their escape routes while keeping options open for ourselves." The blacksmith paused in his hammering to wipe sweat from his forehead. "You really think we can convince Lord Ketil of the truth?" "I think we have to try. The alternative is watching innocent people die while a murderer claims a throne." Rúna tested the barricade they had built across the smithy's entrance. "But even if we succeed, Ingrid won't surrender quietly. She's had weeks to plan for. Contingencies." Across the village, other preparations continued with grim determination. Magnus and his volunteers had dug a series of concealed pits along the main approach routes, not deep enough to kill, but sufficient to break a cavalry charge's momentum. Olaf's sons worked with fishing nets and rope, creating entanglements that would slow advancing warriors and funnel them toward prepared positions. In the trading post, Lady Solveig sat with Astrid and Sigrid, sharing everything she knew about Ingrid's personality and methods. The information painted a picture of a young woman who combined intelligence with ruthless ambition, someone who planned months ahead and eliminated obstacles with clinical precision. "She's 23 years old," Lady Solveig explained, her voice heavy with the weight of unwelcome knowledge. "Beautiful, charming when it serves her purposes, and absolutely without conscience when it comes to getting what she wants. Her father adores her, sees her as the perfect combination of her mother's grace and his own strength." "How long has she been planning this?" Astrid asked, still struggling to comprehend the scope of the deception. "Since she was 16, I suspect." That's when her attitude toward Thormund changed from normal sibling rivalry to something colder. She began asking questions about succession laws, about what would happen if my husband died without male heirs. Lady Solveig's hands trembled as she spoke. "I thought it was just a young woman's natural curiosity about her future. I never imagined..." You couldn't have known, Sigrid said gently. Monsters often wear familiar faces. But I should have seen the signs, Lady Solveig insisted. The way servants began disappearing from the household, always the ones who might have noticed something unusual. The subtle changes in Thormund's behavior in the weeks before he fell ill. The convenient timing of her suggestion that we hire a new healer. Astrid looked up sharply. She suggested hiring me? Oh yes, she heard about your reputation from travelers, spoke eloquently about the need for fresh perspectives in healing arts. I thought she was being generous, wanting the best care for her half-brother. The bitter laugh that followed carried the weight of betrayal. She was setting you up as the perfect scapegoat. Outside, the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Rúna appeared in the doorway, her mail gleaming dully in the firelight. Scouts, she announced. 3 riders, probably checking our defenses before the main force arrives. Everyone to positions. The village fell silent as the riders circled its perimeter, their torches casting dancing shadows against the buildings. They made no attempt to approach or communicate, simply observed and counted, professional warriors assessing the strength of their opposition. Rúna watched them from concealment behind the well, noting their equipment and behavior. These were not common soldiers, but elite guards, the kind Lord Ketil would send to ensure nothing could threaten his daughter's plans. Their presence confirmed her worst fears about tomorrow's confrontation. When the scouts finally departed, she gathered the village's defenders in the trading post's main room. 23 people, counting herself and Astrid. Farmers and fishermen, crafters and merchants, the elderly and the barely adult, against 90 professional warriors, their chances approached mathematical impossibility. But impossible odds had never stopped her before. Tomorrow, Lord Ketil will arrive, expecting to find a village that harbors murderers, she began, her voice carrying the authority of command. He'll demand we surrender Astrid for execution and submit to punishment for our defiance. Our job is to keep everyone alive long enough to show him the truth about his daughter. And if he won't listen, Magnus asked, then we make our stand and hope we've taught him something about the cost of blindly following false justice. Rúna's gaze moved around the room, meeting each person's eyes in turn. I won't lie to you, tomorrow will test us all. Some of us may not see another sunset, but we're fighting for more than just our lives. We're fighting to prevent a kingdom from falling into the hands of a killer. Einar raised his massive hand. What's the plan? Rúna moved to a rough map they had sketched on the floor, using charcoal and colored stones to represent the village's layout. Lord Ketil will likely approach from the north, using the main path. His daughter's scouts will have reported our preparations, so he'll expect resistance. But he's also a father seeking justice for his murdered son, which means he'll want to end this quickly and decisively. She placed a black stone at the village's northern entrance. Gunnar and his men will be our opening gambit. We'll return them to Lord Ketil as a gesture of good faith, along with Lady Solveig's testimony and the evidence of Ingrid's crimes. If we're very lucky, that will be enough. And if we're not lucky, Olaf asked, then we fall back to the secondary positions and try to hold long enough for the truth to sink in. Rúna indicated the defensive positions they had prepared. The key is to avoid unnecessary bloodshed while making it clear that we won't be swept aside easily. Lady Solveig leaned forward, her face grave with concern. You must understand, Ingrid will have anticipated this possibility. She may have sent agents ahead of the main force, people positioned to eliminate key witnesses before they can speak. As if summoned by her words, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts of alarm, the clash of metal on metal, and then sudden, ominous silence. Rúna was on her feet immediately, sword in hand, but before she could reach the door, it burst open to admit 3 figures in dark clothing. They moved with the fluid precision of professional killers, spreading out to cover the room's exits, while their leader, a woman of perhaps 30, with cold, intelligent eyes, surveyed the gathered villagers with calculating assessment. Lady Solveig, the woman said, her voice carrying refined court accents. You've caused considerable inconvenience by departing Valdris without permission. Thesa, Lady Solveig breathed, recognition and fear warring in her expression. I should have known Ingrid would send you. The assassin smiled, revealing teeth like polished ivory. My lady values thoroughness. She sent me to ensure that tomorrow's proceedings go smoothly, without unwelcome complications or inconvenient revelations. Rúna studied the three intruders, noting their stance and equipment. Professional killers, certainly, but she had faced worse odds in her warrior years. The real danger lay in their timing, arriving when the village's defenders were gathered in one place, vulnerable to a coordinated strike. I assume you've dealt with our sentries, she said conversationally. Temporarily incapacitated, nothing more. We're not here to massacre innocents, merely to collect certain individuals who need to be relocated before tomorrow's justice is carried out. Thesa's gaze fixed on Lady Solveig and Astrid. You two will come with us quietly. The rest of these people can continue their preparations for Lord Ketil's arrival. I don't think so, Rúna replied, shifting her weight slightly to a more advantageous position. Thesa's smile widened. Rúna the Red, I presume. Your reputation precedes you, but legends have a way of disappointing in person. You're older than I expected, and this is hardly the time for heroic last stands. It's exactly the time for heroic last stands, Rúna corrected. The question is whether you're prepared for the cost of trying to stop one. The tension in the room stretched taut as both sides measured each other, calculating odds and advantages. But before anyone could move, a new voice cut through the silence, young, clear, and carrying an authority that made everyone freeze. That won't be necessary, Astrid said, rising from her seat with calm dignity. I'll come with you willingly. Astrid, no, Rúna started to protest. It's the only way to prevent bloodshed, the young woman replied, her healer's instincts still focused on preserving life. If I go quietly, perhaps you'll disappear forever, along with the truth about Thormund's murder. Lady Solveig interrupted fiercely. That's exactly what Ingrid wants. Thesa's hand moved to her weapon. Enough talk. You're all coming with us, one way or another. But her words were cut short by the deep, resonant note of a war horn, echoing across the night, the ancient call that summoned warriors to their greatest test. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the village came an answering horn, then another, until the night rang with the sound of approaching destiny. Lord Ketil arrives early, Thesa said, though her confident smile had faltered slightly. No matter. This changes nothing. Rúna moved to the window and looked out toward the northern approach. Torches flickered like fallen stars against the darkness, dozens of them advancing in formation toward the village. The sound of marching feet and creaking leather carried on the night air, accompanied by the rhythmic thump of spear butts against the ground. It changes everything, she said quietly, turning back to face the room. Now we see whether justice can triumph over ambition, whether truth can overcome lies. She looked at each face in turn, villagers and strangers, allies and enemies alike. Whatever happens next, we face it together. The war horns sounded again, closer now, and with them came the promise of a reckoning that had been 30 years in the making. The torches reached the village edge, like a river of fire flowing down from the northern hills. Lord Ketil's war band moved with the disciplined precision of veteran warriors, their shields locked and spears gleaming in the flickering light. At their head rode a figure that commanded attention, even at distance, broad-shouldered and grey-bearded, mounted on a destrier that spoke of wealth and power. Rúna watched from the trading post window as the formation halted just beyond bow range, close enough to be seen clearly, but far enough to avoid surprise attacks. Smart tactics from an experienced commander who had survived enough battles to value caution over bravado. He's no fool, she murmured to Lady Solveig, who stood beside her with the poisoned crown wrapped carefully in silk. This won't be simple. Behind them, Thesa and her assassins maintained their threatening positions, but the arrival of the warband had complicated their mission. They couldn't simply disappear with their targets, while 90 armed men surrounded the village, too many witnesses, too many variables beyond their control. "Lord Catil," came a voice from the darkness, amplified by a speaking horn. "I would parley with whoever leads this settlement. Come forward under truce, and let us settle this matter with words before blood must flow." Rúna felt the familiar calm that had always preceded her greatest battles, the clarity that came when all choices narrowed to a single, inevitable path. She turned to address the room's tense occupants. "Bjorn, you're the village elder. You should be the one to—" "No," the grey-bearded man interrupted firmly. "You're the one he needs to hear from. You're the one who understands war and justice and the weight of difficult choices." His weathered face showed no fear, only the resigned dignity of someone who had lived long enough to know when fate demanded courage. "Besides, you're the only one here he might respect enough to actually listen to." Astrid stepped forward, her young face set with determination. "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not," Rúna replied. "You're the target of this entire exercise. The moment you show yourself, the moment I show myself, he sees that I'm not the monster his daughter has painted me to be." Astrid interrupted. "Lady Solveig's testimony means nothing if he thinks I'm some evil witch hiding behind innocent villagers. He needs to look into my eyes and see the truth." Thesa's cold voice cut through the debate. "None of you are going anywhere except into our custody. This farce has gone on long enough." But before anyone could respond, the assassin's confidence shattered as 3 of the village's young men burst through the trading post's rear entrance. Magnus led them, his fishing spear bloody and his face grim with purpose. "The sentries are awake," he announced, noting Thesa's startled expression with satisfaction. "Turns out fishermen know a thing or two about knots that don't slip when you're unconscious." The brief fight that followed was more chaos than skill. Thesa and her companions were dangerous, but they had expected to face cooperative victims, not determined defenders fighting on familiar ground. Tables overturned, pottery shattered, and steel rang against steel in the confined space. When the dust settled, one assassin lay unconscious, another nursed a broken wrist, and Thesa herself found Einar's massive hand wrapped around her throat with the gentle pressure of someone who understood exactly how much force was required to subdue without killing. "Much better," Rúna said, retrieving her sword from where it had fallen during the melee. "Now we can have our conversation with Lord Catil without unwelcome interruptions." Lady Solveig picked up the wrapped crown from where she had dropped it, checking to ensure the poisoned circlet remained intact. "He'll want proof," she said. "Words alone won't convince a father that his beloved daughter is a murderer." "Then we'll give him proof he can't ignore," Rúna replied, moving toward the door. "Astrid, stay close to me. Lady Solveig, bring the crown, but keep it hidden until the right moment. Everyone else, be ready for anything." The walk to the village's northern edge felt like a journey through a dream, where familiar surroundings had taken on ominous new significance. Every shadow could conceal an enemy, every sound might herald violence, every step carried them closer to a confrontation that would determine far more than just their own survival. Lord Catil waited for them at the edge of the torchlight, dismounted now and flanked by his most trusted warriors. He was a man in his 50s, still powerful despite his graying hair, with intelligent eyes that missed little and a presence that commanded respect without effort. In different circumstances, Rúna might have liked him. "You are Rúna the Red," he said as they approached, his voice carrying the weight of authority and grief in equal measure. "Your reputation precedes you, warrior. I had heard you were dead." "Reports of my death continue to be exaggerated," she replied, stopping at the traditional distance for parley. "I am called Rúna, and I speak for this village."